Yesterday, we talked about the strongest DPS spec in Season 3's 10.2 PTR. We talked about Outlaw, Rogue, however, we also talked about how very likely, almost certain, it was that it was going to be nerfed before the release of the patch because of how overpowered it was. However, today we are talking about the strongest tank in Season 3's patch 10.2 PTR, and unlike Outlaw, this tank is actually much less likely to be nerfed, or at the very least nearly as hard as Outlaw is going to be. So, today we're talking about the current strongest tank in the PTR, which is Brewmaster Monk. Quite a surprise if you consider that since the start of Dragonflight we have gotten the S tier Protection Warrior in Mythic Plus, followed by the S tier of Protection Paladin. In Season 2 we had the beginnings, which looked like Vengeance Demon Hunter was going to be the stable S tier tank, but then it was quickly followed by Guardian Druid as the current meta tank. Throughout all of that, we also had Blood Decay having quite a lot of presence as the second to third better tank, always a very safe pick. So, throughout the expansion, basically Brewmaster Monk has been the only tank that hasn't really had a time in the spotlight, a time to shine as a tank. Well, now it's about to change because Brewmaster Monk is receiving a very, very powerful tier set. And to my credit, a little bit, we did point this out a few days ago when we went through the tier set tier list. We did put Brewmaster as the only tank in the S tier when it came to the power of tier sets. This power increase for Brewmaster doesn't even come in terms of balance tuning, because we don't even have any planned changes in 10.2 to Brewmaster. The only thing they are getting is this tier set. The first bit, which doesn't even look that powerful but will turn out to be the strongest bit of this entire thing, is the two-piece, which reads: Breath of Fire deals 20% bonus damage as Shadow Flame and causes you to heal for 50% of the damage dealt. Now, it looks quite unimpressive when you go and look at the actual damage done by Breath of Fire. So Breath of Fire is barely, not even 5% of your total damage. So adding 20% bonus damage to that doesn't really amount to much. Things start getting quite a bit more powerful with the second bit of this two-piece. You heal for 50% of all of the fire damage dealt. Because when you go and start looking at the fire damage done by Brewmaster, you don't just have Breath of Fire, you also have Charred Passions and you also have Exploding Keg. These three things combined can already make up for nearly 25% of your damage. So now 25% of your damage has effectively 50% leech. This already totals out to be some 12,000 HPS. Now, if you consider that Brewmaster on average heals himself for roughly 60,000 HPS, this is about a 20% self-healing increase, which is a pretty good number. This number, though, gets even bigger, because right now, for example, this tier set heal can crit. And luckily enough, Brewmaster Monks are already stacking crit, even past the 30% range. So this 12,000 self-heal would go all the way up to 16-something thousand. On top of that, this is currently double dipping with your passive, Celestial Fortune, giving you a chance equal to your crit to also increase the heal by upwards of 80%. So your 16,000 plus HPS now gets buffed to roughly 20,000 HPS, and finally, this healing also scales with versatility, which, luckily enough, is the second stat you are stacking as a Brewmaster Monk. So this 20,000 HPS now goes past 25,000 HPS. We're talking about increasing your self-healing by almost 50%, 40% as a Brewmaster Monk, which is already a massive increase in terms of smoothing out the damage you are taking. This would already be a pretty good help for Brewmaster, because the biggest problem of Brewmaster right now is being tankier, not doing more damage. Brewmaster already has the highest damage of all tanks, so really what they are worried about is being able to be more durable, more tanky and more defensive. This gets helped even more by the 4-piece. Now, initially it looks like it's a damage set bonus. Your attacks against targets affected by Breath of Fire, so basically all targets, have a chance, which at the moment is a 50% chance, to deal 10% extra damage as Shadow Flame. And each Celestial Brew also grants a stagger absorb equal to the amount of Shadow Flame damage you have dealt. Now, what makes this very, very powerful is the fact that, of course, with a 50% chance to proc, it means that every other ability you cast will be doing 10% more Shadow Flame damage, and every time that procs, that extra damage will be stored in your next Celestial Brew to give you an extra absorb shield. The extra part that makes it even juicier is the fact that you might have not known, but Shadow Flame damage counts as fire damage. So, back to the 2-piece, you heal for 50% of all of the fire damage dealt. This also counts Shadow Flame damage, which means that now, every time the 4-piece is proccing the effect of doing extra damage as Shadow Flame, 50% of that will also be turned into a heal on yourself, which, once more, can crit, can be affected by Celestial Fortune, and can be affected by versatility to make it even higher of a heal. So not only do you get more stable self-healing over time, you also get a help in the bursty, in the spiky situations with Celestial Brew. Because now, not only will you be getting a absorb shield that you normally get when you use Celestial Brew, now you also get an extra 300,000 to 400,000 absorb shield thanks to the 4-piece that has stored that Shadow Flame damage, extra damage you did, and applied it to your next Celestial Brew. So it's basically making your Celestial Brews 50% stronger. So you get the best of both worlds, being tanky over time and being tanky over spiky situations. Now, this tier set is fixing the biggest problem of Brewmaster Monk. Brewmaster Monk, the reason why they have been the stable #1 pick as a raid tank, but barely ever or not nearly as often as other specs, the #1 tank in Mythic Plus, is because they work very well in the raid. They work super well by taking massive hits, by taking predictable, scripted heavy hits, because they have stagger, because they take much less instant damage, they can take it over time, they have 4 or 5 different healers in the raid that can all help him benefit from Celestial Fortune to heal themselves even more. They can stack their Celestial Brew for when the big hit happens to absorb it almost completely. This works very well in the raid. The negatives, the downsides of having all of these bonuses, like for example having lower HP pool, a lower amount of HP compared to other tanks, doesn't hurt as much in the raid. However, once you move in Mythic Plus, many of these things get weakened and you are faced with other problems. For example, you go from having 4 healers to only having 1. So the amount of healing benefiting your Celestial Fortune from multiple healers goes away. On top of that, in Mythic Plus, the healer generally doesn't even want to heal the tank, so you are mostly alone in Mythic Plus. Having a lower HP pool in Mythic Plus is going to hurt you way more than having a lower HP pool when you are in the raid. And the biggest problem is that in Mythic Plus the damage is random. In Mythic Plus the damage is much more spiky and unpredictable compared to the raid. Is this Frostbolt about to hit me for 400,000 damage going to be interrupted or not? Is this tank buster from a fortified, bolstered mob about to chunk me down to 10% HP going to be stopped by a stun, by a fear, by a disorient, or not? Who knows? Who knows? Tune in next episode to find out. That's kind of how Mythic Plus works. You don't really know when the damage is coming, how often, if things get interrupted, stunned, CC, etc, etc. So the ability of a Brewmaster Monk to predict and to mitigate scripted amounts of damage is much weaker in Mythic Plus compared to the raid. And you could be saying, but this is the same for all tanks. All tanks don't know when and how much damage are they taking in Mythic Plus. so they're kind of all at the same level. Yes, but the problem of Brewmaster is that all these other tanks have more stable and easier way to stay alive and to be defensive with one thing, perhaps the one thing that Brewmaster Monk doesn't have and never had. Brewmaster has the strongest AoE damage of all tanks, they have one of the best utility toolkits of all tanks, they have the best mobility of all tanks, they have one of the better self-healing of all tanks, they are only behind DKs and Guardian Druids right now, they also have a pretty strong amount of defensive cooldowns. What they do lack, however, is the ability to turn damage into healing, to turn offense into defense, to turn the resources they generate from damage into healing. Think about a warrior. The more enemies they are fighting, the more rage they generate, the more ignore pain they can spam. A blood DK in AoE, they can generate way more runic power, which means they can spam way more Death Strike. A Guardian Druid, the more damage you do with Thrash, the more Absorb Shield you gain with Ursoc's Fury. A Demon Hunter, the more Soul Fragments you generate, the more healing you can have with Spirit Bomb. All of these tanks have ways to turn the DPS they do into HPS, into either healing or Absorb Shields. The only one who doesn't is, ironically, the tank with the most damage. Tank with the most damage has no way to actually benefit defensively from doing this damage. It's not that doing a lot of damage with Exploding Keg is going to give them 100% more Absorb Shield in their next Celestial Brew. It's not that using Breath of Fire is going to give them cooldown reduction to their Purifying Brew. None of that. Whether you're fighting 4 mobs and doing 50k DPS or fighting 20 mobs and doing 300,000 DPS, your defensiveness more or less stays the same. That's why this tier set is so powerful for Brewmaster, because it goes to cover their biggest weakness. Because now you are going to be self-healing a lot based on the fire damage and the Shadow Flame damage you're doing, which means all of your fire abilities now have 50% more leech, and all of your other abilities have a 50% chance to proc Shadow Flame damage, giving you self-healing. And on top of that, to finish all of this, the 4-piece will give you an extra much stronger Absorb Shield with Celestial Brew based on the damage you did. So with this very simple change, because as mentioned, no balance tuning is happening to Brewmaster, no major changes, just with a tier set change, going to fill the biggest weakness right now of Brewmaster Monk, they are currently the strongest tank in the PTR. It doesn't always happen, we haven't seen it that often that a single tier set could jumpstart a tank from being at the bottom of the choices in Mythic Plus to the top, but at the moment, at the very least, this one is a pretty good example of something like that. Right now, with this tier set, unnerfed as it is, they do look like the strongest option for Mythic Plus as a tank in Season 3. By the very simple change of now being able to be tankier, the more damage they are doing. So, right now, as we will continue to check the PTR, we will see, of course, if this tier set will be receiving any corrections, any nerfs, any adjustments. So, for the time being, as long as this doesn't get fixed in any way, Monk is our prospect S tier tank for Mythic Plus when it comes to Season 3. Now, all that's left, of course, as usual, is to just wait and see any further changes coming down the line in the PTR. So, with this out of the way, I am going to leave you to the rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, of course, as usual, to all of the Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel, which can still be given, as usual, completely for free. You can like and comment down below to help with the mischievous YouTube algorithm, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. So, with these things out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, and in the meantime, I'm actually okay with that. I have been missing for quite a while a Brewmaster Monk in Mythic Plus, so I actually don't mind it. I'm pretty fine with that.